For the past 2 years, conflict in Mali has been intensifying. The army, backed by Russian mercenaries from the Africa Corps, the successors to the Wagner Group, is fighting armed groups that now control around 2/3 of the country. Now, this escalation has triggered a massive exodus. Since October 2023, more than 300,000 Malians have fled to eastern Mauritania, with even more heading to Algeria. They are escaping violence linked to Malian forces and their Russian allies, as well as blockades by Janum jihadists affiliated with Al-Qaeda, who have cut off supplies to towns all the way to Bamako. Now, the Malian army denies all accusations of abuse, saying its operations only target armed groups, particularly jihadists. A few months ago, we reported that Wagner, the Russian private military company, had rebranded itself as the Africa Corps. A new name, but not a better reality for the people of Mali. Increasing numbers of people have been fleeing their country. Some carry evidence of the violence with them. This woman has verified footage showing what remains of the marketplace in her village, Fayaji, in Mopti region. It's alleged that Africa Corps burned it down. Now, while images of atrocities like that may be rare, there is no shortage of testimony that paints an even darker picture. Our report from the Malian border in Mauritania brings more voices to light. The one interviewers, the accounts you're about to hear are graphic and distressing.
At the end of this road, 500 meters away, lies Mali. Here, on the Mauritanian side, hundreds of makeshift tents have been set up. Over the past 2 years, hundreds of thousands of Malians have crossed the border. This family fled Timbuktu to escape the violence between the Malian army and armed groups that now control much of the north and centre of the country. Like many others, they accuse Malian soldiers and their Russian allies of abuses against civilians.
I saw the Wagner fighters seize a man from the village and lay him on his back. They held him down by pressing on his chest, then slit his throat. They threw his head next to his body. Another man, they shot him in the thigh. He was running and limping. He hid in a hut. The Wagner fighters followed him, took a brick and smashed him with it. Then they set his body on fire while he was still alive, right in front of us, using gasoline.
They left everything they owned behind.
It's the Mauritanians and the other displaced people who gave us what we needed to make this tent. We don't even have enough to eat.
They just finished building this shelter.
We need to find something to reinforce the tent because we have nothing.
The family hopes to settle in Umbara camp, 60 kilometers away, where nearly 150,000 refugees receive humanitarian assistance. But even here at the camp, assistance is limited. Since the United States cut its foreign aid this year, vital help has sharply decreased. Some aid is coming through, but from an unexpected source. Ukraine has been sending food supplies to help victims of the Russian mercenaries operating in the region. At this school canteen in Umbara, Ukrainian wheat and vegetable oil are used to prepare the meals for the children. At school, at least, the children can count on one guaranteed meal a day.
It's only recently, since the canteen was set up, that children started coming to school. Before the canteen opened, the little ones would go into the bush with their parents to collect small firewoods to sell. But the most serious issue is that the number of families receiving no assistance is far higher than the number who have received donations.
Those in the camp are the lucky ones. Half the refugees live outside its boundaries and get no help. They're mostly herders from nomadic communities. Their livestock represents their only wealth. They've had to leave their cattle on the Malian side of the border and must travel back and forth to take care of them. The increase in the number of animals has put increased pressure on local resources. Water was already scarce in this desert region.
We only have this tap for water, for people and for the livestock. Some days there isn't enough. The water we take home, we use it very carefully so the children don't run out of it.
Until now, Mauritanian communities have always shown solidarity by welcoming displaced Malians and sharing their resources with them. But as the number of refugees continues to increase, the question is, for how long?
Right. Now, for many who have escaped the brutality in Mali, their suffering is far from over as the trauma runs deep. Now, there's evidence that rape has been used as a weapon of war. Again, we have to warn you, the testimony in our next report is distressing.
In a desert camp, some of the thousands of people crossing into Mauritania to escape violence in Mali. Outside a clinic wait the anxious mother and aunt of a 14-year-old girl who lies in acute shock from the trauma of what her family says was a brutal sexual assault.
They spent 30 minutes with her and the young man in the house, isolated from us. They hit her. She was scared of them. She started crying, and she cried and cried until they released her to us. Then they took the young man and left.
The family identifies the attackers as members of Africa Corps, a Russian military unit that recently replaced the Wagner Group to help Mali's military government combat jihadist militants.
When they came, they took the girl in the house. We were all scared because we thought after the girl, they would exterminate us all. I had heart palpitations. My heart was racing.
The girl's condition is so critical, the Doctors Without Borders team has to rush her to the closest town where there's a hospital. They suspect there may be many more of such victims.
I'm convinced that the people fleeing Mali to seek refuge here could also be in the same condition. But they just don't ask for care immediately. They only come when things have already become complicated.
So as more people flee the violence in Mali, many scars will remain private and their attackers beyond the reach of justice.
Right, for more on this, let's bring in Beverly Ochieng, political analyst with Control Risks based in Dakar, a global consultancy that provides strategic intelligence. Hello, Beverly. Welcome to the program. Pardon my lost voice a little bit, but let's get to the story that we just saw. Very gruesome story of a 14-year-old whose relatives say she was raped by Wagner Africa Corps forces. Is Wagner using sexual violence to terrorize communities?
I mean, the conflict dynamics in Mali are quite complicated and even in the border region, but these allegations have been coming up frequently from human rights organizations, from medical organizations, which have observed that there is a systematic use of sexual violence as a tool during this war. It's been a more than decade-long insurgency. There are various armed groups and armed actors that are involved. The entry of the Wagner Group, which is now the Africa Corps, has obviously complicated the conflict environment. And it's likely that victims do find themselves vulnerable and may be targeted by various other groups, including the Wagner Group, in these acts of sexual violence. But of course, the government has not fully addressed these issues. They have not acknowledged it. And for the long time, the Malian administration has always denied the presence of Wagner paramilitaries.
Right. It's interesting what you're saying, because from what you're saying, it's not just Wagner Africa Corps that is the problem. It seems to be a more widespread problem, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, the militancy itself is as a result of two groups that had been radicalized going as far back as 2015, 2017. So the main actors are the Al-Qaeda Sahel branch, which is known as Janim, and then you have a faction of the Islamic State of the Greater Sahara, which is ISGS or IS Sahel. Now, these groups do use violence, a tool both to coerce people. They have used violence against communities, and some of it, especially when it targets women and vulnerable populations, tends to be sexual violence. And there are allegations of armed forces sometimes being implicated in forms of violence against civilians. And these are issues that successive governments have had to either investigate or deal with. Just recently, the Malian authorities did expel our gendarmerie, who was alleged to to have been linked to human rights abuses. It's not clear if it's the same wave of violence, but of course it's their way of trying to address the issue while at the same time understanding that it may prevail given the conflict and the dynamics of the conflict.
Right. So from what I understand, the Wagner Group, now Africa Corps, was brought into Mali to try to fight the insurgents inside the country. Is that what it's genuinely doing, or simply keeping the junta in power?
I mean, realistically, because the military government is facing multiple threats, so there are political threats, starting with its legitimacy and the fact that it does have to, in some ways, coup-proof itself, and the paramilitaries have been essential towards that. And at the same time, the security crisis, which does challenge their legitimacy and their authority. And so because of one, the rupture of agreements with the international actors such as the UN, France, the European Union, the Russian paramilitaries came in, presumably to fill that gap, although it hasn't been adequate. And they have had massive setbacks, particularly last year, if you look at the northern region in Tinzawa 10, where there was that attack, which was claimed both by Jenim as well as the armed Tuareg rebels. And at the same time, in parts of the central region, and currently with the fuel blockade, the Russian paramilitaries, in theory, are supposed to be augmenting security forces in Mali and across the Sahel, but so far they haven't proven to be as effective as had been sold during the time when they were being promoted to get into the region.
Right. On that point, I mean, look, the current situation is that jihadists have cut off supplies all the way to the capital, Bamako. Why is it proving so difficult for the Malian army and the Africa Corps to contain them?
Well, because most of the capacity has been extended. For the most part, the military government has focused on operations, the central region and the northern regions, which have been the strongholds of Jenim and partly the Islamic State group. When the rebel insurgency resurged in 2023, a lot of defense capabilities were moved towards the north as a means for the military government to consolidate national territory. In the meantime, there was a gap that was emerging in the south, and this is a strategic region for economic purposes. A lot of imports, whether it's fuel, food products, chemicals, and various other goods coming through the port of Dakar into Bamako, as well as the port of Abidjan into Bamako. And because of those concerted efforts in the north, the Al-Qaeda group was able to capitalize on what looked like an apparent vacuum to then close in on supply lines moving towards the south, leveraging this economic corridor as a means of further undermining the military-led government, but also using it as a means of asserting a form of control, even if it's for a very short-term period. That has been a challenge to address at the moment, given that the capacity cannot be stretched across the region. The Russian paramilitaries also had been focused on the central region and the north, and the fresh redeployments will take a significant amount of time to be able to win back territory in the south.
Right. I mean, thank you for that. I'm just wondering, with the security situation worsening, if Mali's junta realistically can hold on to power.
I think the government is demonstrating that despite the international headlines that have been running over the last few months, that Bamako is really on the brink, that they are able to assert power. In the last couple of weeks, they have made some changes to operations. They have introduced a new operation in the southern region. They have opened up a military base near the border of Burkina Faso as a way of trying to hold back the strength of the Al-Qaeda group, which has not just been combating within that region, but also bringing in reinforcements from neighboring countries. However, this is likely to not be as sustainable, considering the fact that in terms of capacity, the army would need to recruit. They would need to get additional equipment. Some of it is coming in from Russia. Recently, there was a display in Bamako of Russian paramilitaries driving around in armored vehicles. So it's still going to be a test of their strength and of their legitimacy and their ability to ramp up counterinsurgency operations with the same capacity as Jenim is recruiting and undermining the southern region counterinsurgency operations.
Mauritania, right? The country is often seen as the region's stable neighbor. But with hundreds of thousands of refugees and growing water shortages, is Mauritania at risk of being pulled into a wider crisis, you think?
Well, Mauritania is also trying to take its own proactive steps. One of the things it has been doing is, of course, welcoming Malians and other people from the region who are fleeing from the conflict. At the same time, sustaining counterinsurgency operations with Mali, with Senegal, at the off its coast, because there's also a migration crisis there. But there are definitely genuine concerns that if the militancy continues to push along the border, then it will be disruptive, both for humanitarian support, but even for the government's own prioritization. It is still seen as a model of what could be, given the fact that Mauritania was able to proactively dialogue with militants. And sometimes it's a model that is looked at both by Sahelian political and diplomatic actors as a means through which perhaps the Sahel could sustain peace and inclusivity and a form of reconciliation.
Right. Always lovely talking to you. Beverly Ocheng, political analyst with Control Risks. Thank you.
Thank you as well.